This episode is all about motivation. How do we motivate our students? What does it look like in our world language classrooms? Lots of questions around it. I'll be joined by Tracy Rucker, who is going to give us some really actionable ways to go about motivating our students in our classroom. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Hola, mis amigos. Bonjour, mes amis. Welcome on into the World Language Classroom Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about motivation with our students. Before we get into what we're doing about grammar in the classroom and proficiency levels, we need our students to be motivated with questions like, what's the role of the teacher in all of this? What do we put on students? Or how do we know if they're motivated? What does it look like? How can we do it? Why is it important? There's so many questions around motivation. So, to get to the bottom of all this, I am joined today by Tracy Rucker. Now, Tracy Rucker is a name that you've probably seen if you're out in the Twitter world, and he is a French teacher in Louisville. I made sure to say it correctly. I checked with him first. In Louisville, Kentucky. Did I get it right, Tracy?
That's absolutely
Okay.
right. Louisville, that's right.
Louisville, Kentucky. And so he is a high school French teacher. And we were just chatting, and it looks like we have a similar trajectory, kind of like that mid-20s number of year of teaching. And you may have seen his name come up also in many different workshop scenarios and different conferences that are coming up for BER, the Bureau of Education and Research, ACTFL, YABLA, AATF, KWLA, which is the state association in Kentucky. He is a force to be reckoned with, and I am so happy that he has agreed to spend this time with me today. So hello and welcome on in, Tracy.
Wow, what an introduction. What an introduction. Well, Joshua, I just want to say thank you very much for this invitation. And those listeners who are here, thank you for tuning in. Yeah, the thing about our career teaching is that we have to collaborate, we have to be active, we have to connect with each other, and we have to build community. And that is what this podcast to me is all about. Um, we are talking about motivation in the classroom today, and this is a topic that I'm super passionate about.
And now, could you fill in a couple of the blanks with your backstory and how you got into teaching and how you got to where you are today?
Originally from Hartwell, Georgia. There's a beautiful lake there. It's on the coast of Anderson, South Carolina. There's a beautiful lake called Lake Hartwell, and it's a country town where my parents were born. And then we moved from there to Atlanta, where I was raised and went to school. I've also lived in Virginia, Tennessee, and now I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, or like I like to call it, Louisville, but I'm the only person that says that here. I am a proud graduate of the University of the South in Tennessee, and furthermore, Middlebury College. I am, in fact, in my 27th year of teaching. And I just a sidebar. When I first started teaching, I thought I'm going to do this for 5 years. What an illusion that was. And because I wake up every day, and I'm even more motivated today because I don't see retirement in the purview at all. I am hopefully going to continue on. And so I serve also at my school as an 11th grade dean and the Global Citizens Coordinator. And I say that because it reiterates how passionate I am about travel and how passionate I am about creating motivating opportunities for students to continue to learn. And I just thought I would share that my favorite places in the world are Nîmes, France, Costa Rica, Madrid, and Barcelona. And I want to follow this up by saying, Why? Those places are my favorites. It's because of the vibrant conviviality of the people I met there, and that is how I want to start out with this particular session.
Now you're making me want to travel. So, when you think of this word motivation, Tracy, what does it mean to you?
When we think about motivation, I think there are three aspects that are important. Number one, ownership. Number two, personalization. Number three, genuine interest. Those are community building strategies that we have to really just walk into the classroom with on day one. If we can get the students interested via hooking them into the co-created learning environment, we can teach, but we cannot teach until we do that. The second thing is that personalization is so important. I need to, as a student, feel like I am engaging in the activity because I have a personal interest in not only just complying with the activity because my teacher said so, but I want to be involved. I want to be actively engaged. And for me, that is critical because that is the student's genuine interest. That is a very difficult task to accomplish because we have to really figure out all those intricate ways to help the students learn. And once we figure that out, we can actually get in there and get our hands dirty, so to speak, and work.
What do you think teachers sort of don't understand or get wrong about motivation? Like, what is it that they have to understand? Like, what is motivation?
Yes,
I love we're getting into the tools, and everybody loves the tools.
yes,
Like, how do we get them motivated?
yes.
But how would you explain what motivation even is or looks like to a teacher?
Well, I'm gonna channel Aretha Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, RESPECT. That's what it is. Find out what it means to me. And and I mean that because that's how I start when I'm presenting. It's like there has to be a certain respect for the activity. There has to be a certain level of respect. I have to see myself. There has to be a reflection somehow that is either directly or indirectly imminent in the activity. Because when there is relevance and interest, motivation comes. But when there is no relevance, and when there is no relevance to the activity, there is no real motivation. I believe that teachers and students have to co-create before the teacher can motivate the
Mm-hmm.
students, if that makes sense.
And I love that it rhymes. That always helps us to remember it, right?
Yes,
You
co-create before you
There
motivate.
you go. That's your new
somebody,
hashtag.
someone can tweet that out right now. Like
Right.
co-create before you motivate. That's right.
You mentioned earlier that idea of compliance, that
Yes.
students aren't just compliant, they're actually interested and motivated to do the work. And I think some students are really good at putting on the
Yes.
mask of
Yes.
motivation when they're really just trying to make the teacher
Uh-huh.
happy and get the
Yes.
grade. So, can you pull that apart a little bit for us? And how do we move from compliance to motivation?
From compliance to motivation, there has to be three factors. I always keep the numbers 3, 5, and 7 in mind. Everything that I do is based on 3, 5, or 7. So I think that there are three characteristics there that are important. There has to be an emotional response. Number two, intrinsic curiosity, and number three words: details, connections, and personalization. All right, so I'm going to start with the emotional response.
Mm-hmm.
When you look around the room and you see that your students are laughing, that's a good thing. When you look around the room and you see that your students are actually chatting about the stimulus that's in front of them with another student, hopefully in the target language on their terms, that's a good thing. There is an emotional reaction there. That is a positive factor. All right, so that's the number one thing. The number two thing, this is a bigger topic: intrinsic curiosity. That does not always happen, right? to be for something to be intrinsically embedded in us, inside us, we have to want to do it. We have to feel like it is worth the effort. And so when we, for example, use a strategy like picture talk,
Mm-hmm.
which is a comprehensible input strategy that is incredibly effective, we think about how we choose pictures that reflect the 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 the, the various cultures that represent, I'll say, the francophone world, because I'm a French teacher. So when I start, and I'll just give an example here, when I start talking about football or sports, I don't find the most obvious picture that relates to sports. Okay, I'm going to find a picture that can relate to the topic I'm going to use from a different francophone region first. Similarly, when I choose to talk about food, I don't start talking about la baguette or la crêpe or les fruits. I start talking about um, communal eating habits in Senegal, where where citizens gather around a bowl, a large bowl, and they use their hands, their fingers, to eat from the communal bowl. Well, this is a powerful way to open up the culturally, linguistically rich experience for students, because most of our students have never seen that image of eating habits. And therefore, when I think about intrinsic curiosity, I believe it's so critical to find stimuli, I would say, that represent all cultures from around the world. And we're not going to we're not actually teaching the language. We're using the language to help students acquire not only linguistic skills, but culturally rich stimuli.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one is details, connections, and personalization. When students begin to offer details in speaking, in writing, you have hooked them in. They feel connected because they are absolutely personalizing the experience. Students are then providing you a lot more than what is required. It's kind of like, math. You learn that x plus 5 equals 10. So you just have a formula there. But once you can actually add on to other components, 2x plus 5 equals blah, 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 blah. That's when the intrinsic motivation takes place, because the students have a purpose for offering details.
I like that you started out by saying there are three things we know what to expect. You know,
Yes.
you do like your odd
Absolutely,
numbers,
absolutely.
your 3, 5, and 7. You know,
I do.
um,
Yes, I
yeah.
do. I
And
do.
so, in looking at the themes that you are choosing as a way to motivate students and to draw in their curiosity, are you looking to students to find those themes that are of interest to them? What does that process look like for you?
So I think number one, as a teacher, and I say this for the new teachers out there, if you've been in teaching in your first 5 years, especially, this is something that you may not have thought about doing. But on day one, ask students to write a letter in English, right, to you, in which they explain to you what motivates them. They talk about their interests. The students will write a long letter. It can be as long as you choose it to be. I'm asking my kids to tap out at 2 pages because I want it handwritten. What is the purpose of the letter? The purpose of the letter is for you to get to know the students. And that is the very first actionable step that we take in order to be able to do some of the other tasks later on. If we're going to want students to engage in interpersonal conversations, we're going to want to get to know them so that we know what types of topics to add to the fold. The other thing is card talk. I love using card talk. This is another comprehensible input strategy that really is quite effective. And a card talk is where you distribute card stock to students at the beginning of the year. The way I do it is I ask students to draw a line just straight down the paper. And on one side, you have a positive sign. On the other side, you have a negative sign. And I ask students to simply draw images of what they absolutely love and what they don't like. And it's just images. And what do I do with that? I collect those, and the students have no text, it's all images. And I use all of what they populate on those on the cardstock as part of my routine. So during the first weeks of school, as we're gearing up for the new year, this cards talk activity is powerful because it's going to give you some insight into what you are dealing with. So that when you walk into that classroom on any given day, you know that Susie absolutely hates pie, and Johnny absolutely loves chocolate. Well, you might have a piece of chocolate one day for your class. Well, Johnny's going to pick up on that, and you just bought. There's a little bit of buy-in there. But the other big activity that I love doing with my students to get them hooked in, especially at the beginning of the year, and this is one that I use for intermediate level students. This is probably not an activity for beginning students because they don't have the language yet. Your intermediate students need to feel like, okay, we're not starting over. It's not, I'm not going back to the beginning here. I'm going to pick up where I left off. It's going to be hard at first, but we're going to move forward. We're taking the proficiency level to the next level. The activity is called 25 Things About Me. And so there are wonderful videos in different languages on YouTube that show you how to do this. And I ask my students to create a short presentation through any technology source they want to use about them. And I want them to talk through those slides without having text on the slides. And then, everybody finds out 25 things about the students. And I do the same thing. So, I create my own like 25 things about me, and just as a model. So I say all of that because the question is, how can we, or what actionable ways can we impart to motivate learners? And those are three powerful tools that I would like to share. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm seeing the connection to what you had mentioned at the beginning. One of the
Yes.
things was having a co-created situation in the classroom,
There you go.
and that I'm starting to
Yes.
pull all those pieces together. So by the plus and
Yes.
minus, like and don't like
Uh-huh.
cards, then you
Mm-hmm.
use
Mm-hmm.
those, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily that the students are helping to plan the class co-creation, but
That's
their
right.
personal interests are being used
Mm-hmm.
as you go along.
And for those teachers who use textbooks, teachers always ask me about textbooks. So you use textbooks, and I have a system there. But I would say, textbooks are fine. You have to look at the textbook and see how it will work to benefit your customers, your students, because they are customers in sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you have to find the material, and then I always start with the cultural. I'll say that I start with culture first, community building through cultural connections, and then the vocabulary
Mm-hmm.
comes in, and then as needed I bring in the grammar. And after 27 years of teaching, I mean, my system really has changed drastically, because at the beginning of my career I started with the grammar. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is grammar driven, and that's kind of how I looked at it the first sort of year until I learned better. But it's all connected, it's interconnected. And yeah, when I say co-created spaces, when I mention co-created spaces, I'm talking about those opportunities where the teacher and the students are working together to build upon the experience, which is the learning.
Mm-hmm.
The learning has to come through a co-created space. And it's because if it's all teacher driven, you run the risk of not capturing the students.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say that I know that there are teachers out there that are from pre-K to 12. I would think that there needs to be a lot more control at certain levels from the teacher. I think the teacher has to, especially with those younger ones in level 1, for example, the younger kids, yeah, they need a whole lot more guidance. I teach levels 1 through 5, and I will say that by the time they're in level 3 to 4, it's time for them to really take the ownership to that next level of planning and helping actually plan lessons. Yes, that is part of the co-created idea, co-creation idea. And what I mean by that is you have to use some version of integrated performance assessments.
Mm-hmm.
These are tools that allow students and teachers to co-create materials. You have your goals on the IPAs. You have also three modes of communication. So, what am I going to do? What am I going to do in terms of receptive variables? Those are the listening comprehension activities. Those are your picture visual support stimuli. Those are your reading documents. And how am I going to go from the receptive variables to the middle, which is interpersonal communication?
Mm-hmm.
I need to leverage vocabulary and grammar. And then you go to the third mode of communication, which is the productive variables. So what does that look like? But if students know from the beginning that they are going to co-create that IPA with you, integrated performance assessment. I actually call it integrated performance activity now. I don't call it
Mm-hmm.
assessment. Twist on Tracy. That's Tracy's twist. I don't think anybody else is doing it.
They will now.
They will now. That's right. That's right. And I have created my own, and so it's wonderful. And to use some sort of IPA to really structure your unit, your chapter, however you have divided your classes, because they're not even soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
These are really strong skills that students need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So I think that as we've gone through this discussion and hearing your ideas,
Mm-hmm.
that you have touched upon this question, but I'd like to just pull it together specifically. Mm-hmm. When teachers meet obstacles when it comes to motivating students, and again, I think you've kind of addressed it in different ways, but I want to bring it together specifically here. How can teachers proactively go after these obstacles that might get in the way of motivating students?
Okay, so this time I'm going to go with an even number 4.
Okay, awesome.
There are 4 things. I think and they are in order of importance, I would say. I actually thought about this a lot, and I think the number one obstacle is that we tend to go over the proficiency level of the students. I will say, I'm in my 27th year. I am totally guilty of that one. I don't know of any teacher who will say that they're not guilty of going over the proficiency level, because we kind of want to do that every now and then. But it's not a bad thing, because they have to sort of feel stretched. Students have to feel stretched, but you don't stay in that high level when you know that they are actually intermediate low. We don't need to be in advanced high, right? That's obstacle number 1. And then I would say number 2 is that there isn't enough focus on receptive variables that I alluded to that just a few minutes ago. In other words, we don't provide them enough rich input, right? I'm also guilty of that. And I say this because I want people out there that's listening to know that I don't profess to have all the answers. I just profess to know what I'm doing. And I profess to being a lifelong learner who is always reflective of what I do. The third piece of this puzzle, lack of backward design planning. And that can just be simplified: lack of planning, right? We sort of have to have that tighten so that we remove the obstacles, right? And I think the number 4, lack of co-created activities.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm incredibly motivated just by listening to you, to be trying all these things and to keep an eye on a lot of these things. What I particularly appreciate is how you take so many of these ideas that we hear about and are like swirling around in our brain and we think is useful with our students, and you put it together in a very programmatic way where we can understand it. So I really appreciate that. So yes, so you've been inspiring us. So I'm curious where your inspiration's coming from. Are there sort of conferences or go-to influences out there that you turn to?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so because I know I'm gonna miss somebody's name, I'm just gonna avoid the dropping names, and I'm gonna keep it sort of on a bigger scale.
Mm-hmm.
I watch lots of short clips
Mm-hmm.
from a variety of writers and a variety of
Mm-hmm.
presenters who are grounded in, I'll say specifically, comprehensible
Mm-hmm.
input and TPRS. The old school version, the new school, old school and
Mm-hmm.
new school version of the TPRS. Because when I say TPRS, I'm just referring to what I
Mm-hmm.
started out with, which was total physical response. Okay, which is still it's just embedded through the proficiency through reading, right? And it's a wonderful strategy. I listen to podcasts. I like to follow different people on Twitter, just because I get motivated because I will find a post on Twitter many times that a teacher has or presenter has put out there. But I also get motivated when I see my students. And here's a specific one. Yesterday, I was on campus and I saw a student who struggled throughout the entire year in a really bad way. And the student wrote me an email over the summer just saying, Mr. Rucker, blah, 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 blah. And I won't go into details, but it was just a nice email. And she saw me. She was about 100 feet away, and I didn't see her. And she says, Mr.
Yeah.
Rucker. And she came flying up to me and gave me the biggest hug. That is intrinsic motivation for me. When students see me and say, I am happy to be in your presence, that's powerful.
So now we're going to pull the teacher curtain back a little bit to get to know Tracy, the person, with this little activity that
Okay.
I call this or that, just to get a little more insight into you. And
Okay.
always remember, listeners, that when I reach out on Twitter and ask for some this or that's, you should tweet back your suggestions for these. Okay, ready? They're simple. All right, here we go. The first one: you go into a movie theater. Do you sit up close to the screen or in the back?
Oh my goodness. All right, so I'm laughing because I haven't been to a movie
Oh,
theater in
wow.
over
Okay.
25
Okay.
years. um, but I will say,
Okay.
I actually go to the back, but it's the only time in my life that I do anything where I go in the back. I want to be up front. That's the only time. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay. You buy an antique or you buy something new?
that is actually an interesting question because I have about 50-50. Um, I mean, as I look around this room, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's old. That was new.
Oh.
Uh, nothing borrowed and nothing blue because I haven't gotten to that point. um, I'm gonna go with the new. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. And the last one: do you have some time off? Do
yes.
you relax or do you go on an adventure?
I relax.
Oh.
Yeah. However, I'm super adventurous as well. So, you know, can I change that answer?
You can change
I
anything
think
you want.
I think I think I'm gonna go on the adventure. But I know how to relax. Let me put it that way. So,
A relaxing adventure.
no, no, they need to be different, right? Like
Right.
if I because there might be a chance where I just put on my my hiking boots and go hike, and I love doing that. Or I might just take a book, not even my Kindle or my computer, but I'll take a physical book to the beach and I will just be there. Um, Now that's relaxing.
All right.
That sounds really exciting, actually.
Yeah. So before we start to sign off, I want to make
Yeah,
sure that our listeners have a way to get in touch with you because I'm sure they're
sure.
feeling incredibly motivated right now.
Well,
So where can
thank
they
you.
reach out to you, Tracy?
Yes, Tracy E. Rucker. That's at Twitter.
Okay.
I am an avid tweeter. Yeah, I'm active on Twitter and I'm also active on Facebook. But I would love to connect with people on Twitter. I see that as a platform. that can be super helpful in terms of gathering information about strategies for our classrooms. I see it as a platform to really see what other people are doing in their classrooms and to just get a little piece of the chocolate cake in sort of some kind of way. Like I always equate things to cake, chocolate cake especially. Getting a little piece and then think, I'm going to use this. And then you just run with it, that piece of cake, and it becomes something bigger later, because I feel that's what I think Twitter is for. Plus the resources on Twitter, from the, are just immeasurable. So absolutely connect with me on Twitter.
And I reached out to you to join me here on the podcast, which I did through Twitter.
Yes.
An instant message on Twitter, right? Because that's how we know each other.
Yes.
I heard right back from you. It's like, yes, let's go. Let's do this. Let's collaborate, which I really appreciate. So before we say our goodbyes here, is there one solid piece of advice about motivation that you can leave with teachers?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to keep it simple. See your students. That's it. See them. Don't ask the question, how are you? Go to the next level of saying, let's talk about blank. That is a game changer if you think about it, because that question of how are you doing this morning, your students are going to answer that question in the way that they already know you want them to answer. And so the piece of advice is know your students and try not to necessarily ask that basic question of how are you doing. You say, hey, let's talk about blah, 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 blah.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so very much for spending this time with us and for all of your insights.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And thank you so very much for the invitation. This has been a pleasure for me.
So many incredibly actionable takeaways from that conversation with Tracy Rucker, all about motivation. The two that really stuck out to me were that emotional connection will motivate students, and also if they are part of co-creating the theme, it'll be really relevant to them, and that will be motivating as well. Be sure to check out the show notes so you can connect with Tracy directly, particularly on Twitter. You'll also see a link to sign up for Talking Points, which is my weekly email newsletter where you will get language teaching tips during the week, and you'll also know exactly when new episodes of the podcast are published. I'll talk to you real soon. Bye for now. You've been listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss a single episode. Let's continue the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WL Classroom. You can also see over 250 blog posts about language teaching at, you guessed it, WLClassroom.com.